Good morning. The song before class, it's not on. Number 711, Hilltops of Glory. Number 711. Let's sing. Onward rejoicing, I tread life's way. Higher I'm climbing each passing day. Hilltops of glory now rise in view, where all shall be made new. Hilltops of glory. Oh, brother, won't you come go with me? On the mountain I soon shall stand, hilltops of glory land. Footsteps of Jesus before us lead. We tread life's journey, his warnings heed. Evil allurements cannot prevail. I'm on the upward trail. Hilltops of glory I now can see. Oh, brother, won't you come go with me? Safe on the mountain I soon shall stand. Hilltops of glory land.
Heavenly Father, thank you for making it possible for us to all be here. Please bless all the teachers and all of the students and help us learn what you would help us learn. And please help us, Lord, to be pleasing to you. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. If you'll open your Bibles to Proverbs Chapter 8. Believe it or not, we're going to talk about wisdom this morning. Proverbs Chapter 8, we'll start in verse 1. Does not wisdom call and understanding raise her voice? On top of the heights beside the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Besides the gates at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out, "To you, people I call, and my voice is to mankind. You naive ones, understand prudence, and you fools, understand wisdom. Listen, for I will speak noble things, and the opening of my lips will reveal right things." We'll continue down here in just a second, but this harkens back to what we saw at the beginning of Proverbs, where we see wisdom out in the street calling, and the visual that we related it to is an actual person standing out in the middle of the street, a busy city center, Not where there are going to be a lot of chariots and horses passing by quickly, but where people are walking through. I mean, if you picture being in the middle of a shopping mall, or you picture being in the middle of a busy street in Atlanta, not where the cars are flying by, but where people are walking through, and someone is standing there at one of the busiest places and actually calling out to people around you, they're going to pay attention. If you've ever been to Times Square in New York City, and there are the characters dressed up around, and you see the people who are there. If you had someone standing in the middle of that group of people and they were shouting, it would get a lot of people's attention. So this is kind of what you can picture here, is that wisdom is making herself known to everybody. And if we're thinking not just about this as a person, but what it means to us in actual life instead of this analogy or this metaphor, is that wisdom is available to everybody. It's in all of it's readily available. It's in all of our faces, if you will. That the Bible is accessible to everyone. Because the Bible is accessible to everyone, that means that God's will is accessible to everyone. The knowledge of His will, and that if it is accessible to everyone, then we just have to hear what it is. And we're going to see more about that in these next couple of chapters that we're going to take a look at. And then be willing to, we're not even going to get to the be willing to piece yet. Because if someone's calling out in the middle of town square, one, you have the choice whether you're going to listen or you're going to ignore it and you're going to walk away from it. If you do listen to it, then you would have to engage with what they're saying to make any decisions based on what they're saying. So we're not going to get into that engagement here. We're just going to talk about the fact that it's available to us and that we can hear what God, our Father, has to say for the will of all human beings on this earth. But it's a very obvious thing. This isn't a secret. It's not anything that you have to be able to take a lot of effort to discover. It's something that's easily accessible to all of us. Verse 4, to you people I call, and my voice is to mankind, to all human beings. You naive ones understand prudence, and you fools understand wisdom. Verse 6, listen, for I will speak noble things, and the opening of my lips will reveal right things. For my mouth will proclaim truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. So wisdom will not provide any wickedness. It will only truth will come from wisdom. Noble things will come from wisdom. Right things will come from wisdom. Verse 8, and the words of my mouth are in righteousness. There is nothing crooked or perverted in them. They are all straightforward to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Accept my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. So if you think back to our very first class, where we were talking about the things that Solomon could have sought after, the riches, the power that could have come along with his kingdom, and instead he sought wisdom from God, and he was rewarded with those riches and with the power in his kingdom. But that's not what he sought. He sought wisdom. And here we see that we too, as all people, should be seeking wisdom. We should not be chasing earthly gain. We should be chasing the wisdom that would lead us to righteousness, that will keep us from perverting our ways. Verse 11, for wisdom is better than jewels, and all desirable things cannot compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride, arrogance, the evil way, and the perverted mouth I hate. And we've seen that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord, we talked about what it means in terms that make sense to us today. But if we're looking at the biblical definition of the fear of knowledge, we get a definition here. It's to hate evil. We know what things are evil because we can read the Bible and see what is within God's will and what he does not, what is not within his will. And so if we know what is evil, then we shouldn't run to it, as we've seen already in Proverbs. We shouldn't even get close to the door of what's evil. We shouldn't be interested in it. We should actually despise it. We should hate it. We should not even have any inkling toward its appreciation. We should completely despise what is evil. And within that is pride, arrogance, the evil way, and the perverted mouth. So if you're looking for a list of things to stay away from, there's part of that list. We saw more of that list last week with the six things that God hates and 7 that are an abomination. Verse 14, advice is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding. Power is mine. So the power comes with understanding. By me, kings reign. So kings reign by wisdom. Rulers decree justice. By me, princes rule and nobles, all who judge rightly. Not just those who judge. You can judge unrighteously. You can judge wrongly. But if you're looking for someone who is judging rightly, they're judging using wisdom as their standard. I love those who love me, and those who diligently seek me will find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, even pure gold, and my yield better than choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness in the midst of the paths of justice, to endow those who love me with wealth, that I may fill their treasuries. Verse 22, the Lord created me at the beginning of his way. So this is interesting. We see in the creation account specific things that are made. We do not see in that list in the first part of Genesis wisdom being made. But if we take a look here, we see that before his works of old, from eternity, I was established. From the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth, when there were no ocean depths, I was born. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was born. While he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the first dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he inscribed a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when the springs of the deep became fixed, when he set a boundary for the sea so that the water would not violate his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master workman, and I was his delight daily, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the world, his earth, and having my delight in the sons of mankind. What do you think about this? We've seen that it's wisdom being personified as a person here, and then we see that before the earth was created, even in the heavens. What are your thoughts?
This is the wisdom that's from above, obviously. I mean, that's from God himself.
From God himself. I mean, before the earth was even made, wisdom was there with him as he was making his decisions before he even made the earth. It was his. I love the words that are used. In verse 30, then I was beside him as a master workman, and I was his delight daily, rejoicing always before him, and then rejoicing in the world, his earth, and having my delight in the sons of mankind. What other thoughts do you have about this particular?
Well, you say here God, mentioned verse 17, speak. Matthew 7, here, God talks about seek and you shall find. Verse 7 and 8. So here in verse 17, he's talking about those that seek shall what? Find. So what's going on here? Well, how do you find wisdom? Seek and hunger for it. So we hunger for it, we seek for it, therefore we seek that wisdom.
That's right, and it's not anything that's innately within us. I mean, if it's something that's within us already, we're not going to have to look for it. We're not going to have to find it and then apply it. It existed before the earth was even made because it's how God makes his decisions. It's with his own his own wisdom, the wisdom that's from above, his wisdom. And then if you look at when the earth was created and the first people that were put on here, and we see the relationship between wisdom and mankind. It's included here a couple times in the words that we read. That Adam and Eve had an opportunity to use that wisdom. It was there before they even were here. It was available to them, and yet they denied that wisdom. Had they sought that wisdom, they would have found it, and they wouldn't have committed the sin that they committed to bring death to human beings. In the earliest example, we see how they should have sought it, and they would have found it, and they could have used it to their benefit. And they, in that moment, sought what they wanted, what the earth had to provide to them versus what God had to, or what the earth had offered to them.
We also think about it as, as those that seek wisdom and seek God's temple. So we can ask ourselves from the previous verse, why do people commit evil? We can ask ourselves that question. From verse 13. Well, because they don't hate it. Here you go. We are to hate evil. We are to seek righteousness from God. Just as David said, Psalms 119, I hate every false way. So we hate every false way, so therefore we seek that wisdom, which is from God.
Yeah. Brother Miller?
You can see in this chapter especially the close connection between wisdom and God,
Mm-hmm.
which begs the question, is there any wisdom apart from God? I will forever remember what I heard a preacher say on the radio one day, something about wisdom I'd never thought about previously. He said wisdom is seeing something the way God sees it. I think that's spot on. Wisdom is when you see something God's way. Whether you're talking about marriage or family or right or wrong, anything. When you see something the way God sees it, you have wisdom. Is there really any wisdom apart from God? On a lighter note, don't you find it interesting in this personification? Wisdom is described in the female gender rather than the male. And I say that as one married for 41 years and 3 daughters and 4 of my 5 grandchildren being females. I find it interesting. Her.
Yeah.
She's a she.
Well, she clearly got me.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is for those who studied this at length, before I have. It's kind of a general side note here. I don't mean to distract too much, but I can't help but wonder, because we're again discussing wisdom and what did God offer to Solomon, whatever, and he asked for wisdom and discerning heart, and God granted it to him more than anyone who were before him. And so I guess the question I'm having here, with these Proverbs of Solomon, at what point in his reign, in his life, did he write these? Did he author these? And I say that in light of what we typically think of, for example, in Ecclesiastes. We read Ecclesiastes, and at least I do. I take the view that Solomon wrote that near the end of his life, after having experienced all the things there are to experience that he wrote about. And then having learned the valuable lesson, which is to fear God and keep his commandments. And it kind of ties in with Jesus' assessment, consider the lilies of the field, they don't toil or spin, yet even Solomon in all his glory. I would find it difficult for Jesus to praise Solomon like that if he died an apostate. I guess it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. So I think everyone pretty much assumes that Solomon got sidetracked for a while, but then he came back. And the question I'm having here is about the book of Proverbs as it relates to Ecclesiastes. Were these Proverbs written before or after his fall? I mean, because when you read these words, and this is the reason I'm asking the question. When you read what he's saying, and not just here but throughout, as he comes back over and over again to wisdom and how it behaves and what it does. The man married 700 women, and he had 300 concubines. Now, anyone invites that many mother-in-laws into your life, you have to question their judgment. And so
just from the way that the type of advice he's giving, and often referring to his son or sons when he's giving this advice, it sounds like something that a middle-aged father would pass along advice to his son, who is maybe a mid, in our own society, like a 15, 16, 17-year-old son, and the things that he's going to be faced with. Because you're talking about running around with friends who are going to go off and kill people. You're talking about being enticed by women. It sounds like maybe that's something that he would have been faced with before. It sounds like something new. Hey, look, when you're faced with a woman who's going to lead you down this path, don't do it. But it also sounds like when we talk about don't even get near her door, and you think about the path that Solomon would have had to go to, it sounds like he got to the door and then went in and then found it to be easier and easier and easier until he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So whether it was, we also don't know necessarily how old he was at different points when he had however many children he ended up having with that many wives and concubines. I'm sure he had more than we have a record of with his own sons. Papa?
You know, Solomon prayed for wisdom and God granted. And so I didn't hear everyone speaking. I'll apologize if I'm repeating. But James chapter 1, verse 8 is a remarkable passage in the New Testament. James says to him, you lack wisdom, let him ask of God to give it liberally, and upbraid it not, it shall be given him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to do especially toward the end of the class. By the way, today's our halfway point. We have 6 classes after this. So we're not halfway through Proverbs, so we'll either have to do a summary of a few chapters here toward the end until we can get to some of the.
I got in my notes that these were written about the middle of Solomon's life.
Yeah. That would make sense. If you're, as we look at the chronological account of the things that he went through, I could see that being the case. But is that based on some?
It's just notes that I've
Yeah.
taken and written down
Over time?
from school and things like that.
It is interesting, and I think it's a really good question, something that we should all think about as we're thinking about the advice, because we do know that he had the opportunity to learn from experience. He had the wisdom from God granted to him, so he could have written all of this as almost the way that we view preachers in their lives, and we say, well, because they spend so much time in study, and they aren't tempted by the things of the world the way that we are, which we all know that's just the way that we see that. What's that, Jeff?
The place of the writing is also from Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The location is helpful in determining that.
And verse 17, Jonathan, I think you got to keep in mind, wisdom says, those who seek me diligently will find me. If you quit seeking wisdom diligently, you ain't gonna have it.
Right.
I don't care what your age is.
Right.
It's something that you have to diligently seek. And that involves prayer, of course, but it involves many other things as well.
That's right. And something that you have to continue doing. You don't arrive. You don't arrive and say, I've conquered it, now I'm good for the rest of my life. It's something you have to continue doing. Chris?
And what's always interesting to me about Solomon is he asked for this wisdom from God. God granted it to him, and yet even though he had that, he still managed to go over to this life of seeking pleasure in the world and trying to find pleasure in the world. And I think that goes along with it's got to continually be a seeking thing. One that, for whatever reason, whether it was getting prideful in his own abilities and not remembering that it was from God that he had those, or whatever it was. I think that's a very cautionary tale for us, that even with the wisdom that he was granted, he still managed to be taken in by the pleasures of the world.
Maybe that's why wisdom is, in fact, personified and described as a person. Even a master craftsman who's even with God, the creator of the world, because it's like any relationship. If you don't nurture it, you're going to lose that relationship. You may have wisdom, but then wisdom may leave you. But I guess if we're looking at Solomon in that light, at least wisdom can be regained.
true. That's true. And going back to the personification as a woman, if we're looking at the gender of the person that's being identified, culturally at this time, had you had a woman in the middle of the town square calling out, people likely wouldn't have listened to her. They wouldn't have engaged in that type of listening to someone in the town square calling out. They wouldn't have sat at her feet and learned. So it's interesting that it is a woman who is trying to bring people in, but at the same time, if you look at the comparison to the adulteress, and if you want to relate the adulteress to other sin outside of just adultery, just to say that it's adultering to the relationship we have with God, we know that even if you look at how Solomon was drawn away and to do so many of the other things, he was drawn away from God because of the gods that his wives and his concubines were serving. He was doing favors for his wives, and as doing favors for them, he was building temples and altars to the gods that they served. And so if you're saying that this woman is who you are interested in, and you will do things for these women that you are interested in, I think it's interesting to have that comparison of it is an adulteress who could draw you away, but it's also this woman who can draw you into God as well. Mike?
It's very interesting because I looked at it in a different way. Because he had these gardens and pools and the concubines, he had great possessions and everything. In Ecclesiastes 2:9, he says something very important at the very end of that verse. He says, "Also my wisdom remaineth with me. I deny nothing before my eyes." And in the very end of his life, it was all vanity. It was vexation.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had his wisdom there. He just wanted to feel the joy of his heart, and his heart wasn't with the joy of the things that presented before his eyes. It was the love it was the love of God,
Right.
the wisdom of God.
Yeah. Hey.
1 Kings chapter 4, states that which was given, again at verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding, exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is of the sea. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all the men at Ethan and Israel and Heman and Catlach and Dardan, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And he spake of trees from the cedar tree and of the Lebanon, even of the hyssop and the springeth out of the wall, and spake also of the beasts and the fowl and the creeping things and all the fishes. And there came all the people that hear his wisdom, Solomon, from all kings of the earth which had heard of his wisdom. Looking at this, and Solomon, received that wisdom from God and all, that maybe the proverbs were written before Patrick was asking,
Mm-hmm.
before he committed all those things.
Right. And thankfully we have an opportunity to see what he wrote in Ecclesiastes on the opposite end, or having learned many of his lessons before he passed away, his parting words for us, which would be great if we had more time to go through and study that as well.
Well, I hate to belabor the point, but I think it's worth considering because and we all look for the wisdom of Solomon, right?
Sure.
I mean, and we recognize and we acknowledge, as the inspired writer said, he was exceedingly wise. And yet he not only married these outlandish women that led him astray, he also planted the seeds of discord that upon his death, of course out of deference to him that he didn't do anything about it, but when he died, there was an outright rebellion and the kingdom split in two because of policies he had set up.
Yeah.
So where was wisdom in that? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get my mind around is even if we possess the wisdom of Solomon, at the end of the day, we're still flesh and blood. We're still weak. We're not perfect. Even Solomon was far from perfect. And yet he's praised for his glory and for his wisdom. And just like David, God's own heart. And you have to look what we know about David. I mean, I guess there's a sense in which we don't justify ourselves, but maybe we find comfort in acknowledging that even when we recognize our own flaws and weaknesses, we're in good company, you know, and we just pray that God have mercy on us, just like he did on these individuals. You know?
Yeah. And wisdom's only really the beginning. I mean, just having the knowledge and the understanding, and then we have to have the follow through. I mean, we have to have the strength and courage to act on that wisdom. We have to hate evil. We have to humble ourselves. We have to surround ourselves with others who can help us on our journeys. I mean, there's a lot that gets us to the next. That gets us to action, you know. And obviously, Solomon was surrounding himself with people who were not helping him use that wisdom. He was surrounding himself with others who would take him away from that wisdom that he had been granted by God, the heavenly wisdom.
Jonathan,
Yes.
just in relation to him referring to wisdom as a her,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of just struck me the power actually that women have to promote good versus evil,
Mm-hmm.
or to lead.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you, even all the way back to Eve,
Right.
she chose wisdom, and it's not that she didn't have the power to do that. She did. Her choice was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the contrast there, you know, as far as the power that we hold to lead our families.
Absolutely.
You know, to lead other people.
Yeah. The influential power that you have is great. That's a great
Man
one
can
too.
scream about being the head of the house if I want to, but she's still the man.
That's true. All right, so verse 32. Now then, sons, listen to me, for blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to instruction and be wise. Do not neglect it. Blessed is the person who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at my doorpost. For one who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. One who sins against me injures himself, and all those who hate me love death. Move on to chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has carved out her 7 pillars. So there's the perfect number 7. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has set out her attendants. She calls out from the tops of the heights of the city, whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. Abandon your foolishness and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. So there's benefit to wisdom. And this is the language that's used here is just to explain that there is benefit to wisdom. When people are trying to explain wisdom, it should be done in a way that is enticing. We should talk about the benefits of wisdom. It's not just wisdom for the sake of wisdom. It is that there are benefits in life to acting wisely.
It's fascinating what you said a minute ago about the adulteress versus wisdom and both being female. I mean, what you just read here in chapter 9, as wisdom is inviting the naive into her house.
Mm-hmm.
And she's inviting them to come eat of my bread, verse 5. But if you go later in the same chapter, verse 13, a foolish woman is clamorous. And what does this foolish woman does? She invites these people, the simple ones, into her house, and she says, stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret. I mean, they're both offering bread. They're both
Right.
offering something to eat.
Right.
And who are you listening to?
Yeah, and what are the results of going into them? I mean, part of it is that you have to, if you're going to go visit somebody, you wanna go to the right house, right? Someone invites you over to their house, and you know whose house you're going to. I mean, I know that's such a simple analogy, but someone invites you over, and you go to the wrong house. You knock on the door. I mean, number one, they probably don't want you there, and then 2, you probably don't want to go in there. You rarely go over to someone's house to go inside if you don't know whose house you're going into. So if you look at the difference between the adulteress's house or wisdom's house, whose house you're going to go into. You know what is being offered to you by going into that house. You know what the results are going to be by going into that house. You know the relationship you're going to create with wisdom, or the relationship you're going to create with sin, by getting to the door of the house of sin or the house of wisdom. And we want to go into and create the relationship with wisdom. We want to reap the results of entering into the relationship with wisdom. We do not want to reap the results of going into the house of sin. Even if we want to momentarily, even if we have the desire and we're enticed by what is in that house of sin, that relationship with sin, we may want the results temporarily. We may think we want the results now, but if you think through what the results are of sin long term, we don't want those results. Likely, when we don't even want those results on this earth, more or less the eternal results of entering into the relationship with sin. And so knowing what that house has to offer you, short term and long term, should help you make the decision as to which house you get near. Jeff?
Verse 1 there talks about that 7 pillars. Seven pretty much is complete.
Right.
That's the complete number. So if you have that, so you build upon that, you build on that, and you depend upon it. But verse 4, what do you say? Don't go in that other house. Well, verse 1 depend on that pillar, that place. Don't go in that house. Stay away from the other house.
It is the perfect house.
Pastor talked in his sermon many times. Stay away from that. Run from it. Get away from it.
Yeah.
So depend on that pillar. That wisdom from God.
Thank you for that. Verse 8. Do not rebuke a scoffer, or he will hate you. Rebuke a wise person, and he will love you. Oh, I'm sorry, we actually skipped a verse there in verse 7. One who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and one who rebukes a wicked person gets insults for himself. Do not rebuke a scoffer, or he will hate you. Rebuke a wise person, and he will love you. You think this verse is telling us not to correct scoffers and not to rebuke wicked people? Like what? Chris? You're right.
Yeah, and I think, to me too, as I read this, and I think about this in the context of it, I've heard those verses and those thoughts before, but in the context here, you can't approach someone who doesn't know God, doesn't know the Bible, anything like that, and start with, oh, you're living your life wrong.
Right.
You've got to start with building that wisdom within that person and building an understanding of who God is and why God loves you and what God did for us before you can then begin to correct behaviors and correct those things. You've got to start with giving them that wisdom of God, teaching them the wisdom of God, and before you can correct the behaviors. If you start simply with, oh, you're not living right, oh, you need to get better, most people are going to abuse you for that. They're going to reject you for that if that's the way you start out. And so it's all about building that wisdom.
Yeah, if you build that wisdom and then you have a chance to rebuke that person to help them understand. I mean, because that's what, I can't remember which chapter it was, but one of the earlier chapters where it talks about providing instruction, and then we also have rebuking after it. Providing instruction really isn't enough. You have to guide, and part of that guiding is rebuking, saying when you are violating the standard. We set the standard with instruction, and then the rebuking comes along with saying you're not following the instruction. You're violating the standard that's been set. So if someone is wise and they're seeking God, they're seeking the righteous path, and then you let them know that they are not on that path that they are seeking, they're going to appreciate you for it. They're going to say, wow, I know what my goal is. My goal is to get to heaven. My goal is to please God. I am learning, and you have pointed out a time where I am not, times, whatever it is, a lifestyle, whatever, that is not in accordance with the standard that is going to help me meet my goal. Thank you. But someone who doesn't have that goal, someone who doesn't have that wisdom that is going to appreciate even the standard, they're not going to. They don't care. They're going to say, "What? Who are you to tell me that I'm not living up to a standard I don't even care about?" Chris.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it also makes me think of kind of what's gone on recently with the Woodstock congregation and just seeing the comments that are made online by various people and things like that, and just you can see so clearly the difference in their wisdom and their understanding versus our wisdom and understanding of the Word of God. Like they can't comprehend that the way the elders approached this, the way the elders did this, could have been done out of love. It was, oh, this was a hateful thing. Oh, this was a terrible thing. Oh, how could you do this? Not understanding that we're trying to do this according to the way God's told us. And unfortunately, this lady that kind of blew all this up on social media, that unfortunately this woman who had been going to church there hadn't gained this wisdom or whatever, or hadn't comprehended it or chose to reject it or whatever.
And you can clearly see how people have by rebuking a wicked person or rebuking a scoffer, that there are insults and hate as a result. I mean, it was written thousands of years ago, and we see it today in 2021. All right, so we'll finish this chapter up next week, and we'll pick up there as we continue studying Proverbs. Thank you.